So, hello everybody. We start our last speech in this stream. It's 11 o'clock in the morning here with us in Switzerland, but where our next speaker is, it's a little bit earlier. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning. So he had to get up very early today. Thank you very much, Rene, that you took this on your shoulders for the Swiss Oracle user group. Rene works at Pythian in Mexico City, and he had, as I said, to get up very early to attend us. I hope you have a coffee or you have had a coffee, Rene. He is an Oracle ace and a frequent speaker at different user groups and conferences. So he will talk about his first 100 days with the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. Welcome, Rene, and thank you for getting up and coming to us.
No worries, and thank you very much for having me. It would have been a pleasure being over there, but you know, the circumstances, it is what it is. But yeah, really glad to be here, and I think I know a couple of people from other conferences, but yeah, thank you very much. So I'll get started. Any questions that you might have within, please make sure to ask them. Pascal will make sure that I get them. So let's get started. So thank you again to the Swiss Oracle user group, to all the platinum and gold sponsors, and again, just glad to be here. Where do I come from? I come from a company called Pythian. I think some of you, or most of you, might know what Pythian is. We're a big data infrastructure, DevOps, cloud, managed services team. So where do I come from? I used to have this slide of like where all of the things that I've done and all of the places that I've spoken, but I think it's easier if you just Google my name and you'll find me here. This is my page, and I tweet at Rene_Ace, so you can find me there. I think it's easier. So I'd like to start with this slide of how did you get to be a DBA, and especially when we're talking about a cloud DBA, right? Myself, I started with this left upper corner of being enticed. I was a PHP Oracle developer back in the days. I started with 9.2, and the DBA had left, and they told me if I wanted to be a DBA, and I said, yeah, why not? And when I first started, I was this little girl that's right there. I started crying because I realized of everything that it implied. And the next slide, this man in the construction one following, is me doing my first production release. And the next one, the one's on fire, that's normally how my handovers go, right? And I normally, after a very long production release, I tend to fall asleep on the floor. And the kid in the Batman suit, this is just me running away and trying to be a photographer, which is what I love to do, right? So getting started on what database as a service is, right? So it's I like this comic, right? And because cloud computing is just magic to some of us, right? And the other day I was reading a tweet that, and it kind of hit me, and because some of us are transitioning into this cloud world, or have been transitioning into this cloud world for a couple of years now, right? But DBAs, new DBAs that are coming in into our trade, they're just DBA. They're just cloud DBAs, right? It's very hard for them to be on-premise DBAs. So I like to start with just describing what database as a service is for the persons who are getting started, right? And there are some key characteristics. It's the resource pooling, the rapid elasticity, the measured service, and it's just broad network access, right? There's normally 3 service models, and there's a couple of deployment models as well. What I'm normally seeing, it's obviously hybrid. It's you do get some private clouds, but what you get to see a lot is more of hybrid. And I think Mark Hurd said it a couple of years ago at Open World that by, I think, 2024, 2026, he said that 100% of the companies were going to be 100% cloud. And I'm like, no, I still see that far away. And we're at 2020, and it's just a couple of years. And especially in big enterprises, that's where we don't see that, and it's not happening. Where hybrid is mostly where we see it, right? When we try to talk about database as service, I love the slide. Pizza service. It came out a couple of years ago, or more than a couple of years ago. But how does it stack up when we're talking about platform as a service, right? So it's when we get to the runtime part of it. Software as a service, at least for myself, it's not where I tend to go to. I stay at the platform level, right? Everything underneath is where I start, right? So what are the common drivers, right? So you might see some of the drivers that your company or yourself are doing right there. But most of the time it's cost, it's agility, and you still see it out there, like trying to build a new rack environment on site. It takes a while. While we get the new servers, we set up the interface cards, and we set up the operating system, install, and we go through that whole process where when we start doing it with cloud, it is much faster. But for us to understand what database as a service is, I'd like to go through like the service delivery lifecycle, and this applies not only to database as a service, it's anything as a service, right? We capture the demand, we define our strategy, and take this for example, right? It's McDonald's. When they defined their service, they could have gone whole wide, but instead they went through a small menu. That was their demand. They defined their catalog, their resources, their technical resources. What is it that they needed? And they start building the deployable. Then the consumer starts purchases. We initiate the request. Then it gets deployed, and we start operating, right? Once we get that, then the last phase of anything as a service is we need to start monitoring how how we start consuming it, how we start using our cloud or anything as a service. And now when we get to Oracle, well, basically you can see that they've done all of this, right? So like when we try to request a new database, being Exadata and autonomous database, the virtual machine, they basically do all of those parts that they have set up, right? So how do you get started? As I said, this talk is more about your first 100 days with CI, right? So it's you go to cloud.oracle.com. You either get a free sign up or your enterprise has already done this for you, right? So, and that's where you start, right? Now, Oracle has talking about platform and database. It has several services out there. We have the latest one, so it's the autonomous data warehouse and the transaction processing. But it started with like the very first services that they had was Apex and Schema as a service. Now, I don't know if some of you remember the Schema as a service, but that one sucked very, very bad. But I think as time has gone by, Oracle has been getting more mature regarding their offerings within the cloud, right? Now, when we're going to be starting, right, and talking about database or OCI, one of the first things that I'd like to do, especially because I'd like consistency and starting to manage our cloud much cleaner. It's create a group, right? And this group is just to manage which resources they're going to be have permission, right? And no group within Oracle cloud infrastructure allows you to do anything unless you write at least one policy. So the next thing I go ahead and do is I create a compartment. Compartment are basically to organize and isolate your cloud resources. They're tenancy wide, so they're across a whole region. So it's not only for the region that you're currently at. So that's very important thing to know, right? Now, once I create my group and my compartment, then I create a policy so that I can assign a group to it, right? Now, one of the things to know about policies is that they're in an Oracle policy language, and you can find this how to do it within the documentation. So in this case, I created a group called Rene's dash admins to manage all resources. And in the group, in the compartment that I created before. So these are the basic things that I start with, and then as you can see here, this is basically how it looks within the cloud infrastructure, right? The very first thing that you start to notice when you start managing Oracle Cloud infrastructure, and basically as well, if you've managed something like Azure or Google Cloud, like setting up the networking part on that side of it was quite easy. And until about a year ago, creating a network and managing the network was very, very complex. So or I wouldn't say very complex, but it was very different from what Google and Azure and AWS was doing. So they introduced this virtual cloud wizard creator, right? So it helps you set up your CIDR block. It helps you set up your subnet and your private subnet very easily, which until a couple of years ago, it was very complex setting it up so that one of the first things, at least back then when I started to play around with OCI, is like it was very easy to create a database, but like me connecting to that database was like, and especially with because the information was not there in the documentation as clearly as I would have liked. It was very complex for me, right? So I did a lot of digging around and all of that. So I really appreciate that Oracle set up this this VCN wizard, and it creates a default route table, security list, and the and dynamic host options. So I really do appreciate that Oracle put some effort into this, right? Obviously, if you want to do more complex things, then you go within the networking part of Oracle and of OCI and start to play around with it. But if you want to just get started, using this wizard becomes very easy. Now that I've created my virtual cloud, one of the first things that I like to do is obviously, well, let's create a database, right? Now there's several ways to create it. One is the autonomous database, and the other is either a virtual machine, a bare metal, and the famous Exadata. In this case, I'm just creating a virtual machine. You can change the shapes of this virtual machines. Once you start to do that, you'll get a different core counts and the different node counts. Obviously, as you start and move your shapes around and what you have permission as well to do, this comes as well from your admin. It depends on the pricing that you're going to have, right? So it's very important that you size this correctly, right? So after that, one of the things that in the past you didn't have a good choice about it was like the storage management that you will have. Now you have a choice of if it's going to be a grid infrastructure or a logical volume manager, right? And obviously, again, here's where we can configure the sizes. Let's see, I have a question up here. Oh, it says that the video quality is quite poor. Let me see. Pascal, is there anything do you think that I can do for this?
Rene, this is Matthias. I think I can see your slide quite okay, where the font is rather small, but that's a different topic. Maybe Martin, are you on a VPN connection? Maybe you should drop the VPN and connect directly to Zoom.
Okay. Thank you for that. So one of the important things here is to upload your SSH keys, especially because that's the way that you're going to be connecting to the virtual machine. And obviously, what type of license are you going to be using, right? So it's I have another question here. And so it's either bring your own license or the license included within Oracle infrastructure. If it's bring your own license, obviously always check with your rep. What is it that you're gonna be using? So you don't want to go over, and there's all this cloud units that you have assigned, or so just always check what is it that your license is going to be allowing you to do within the cloud infrastructure. As I said, once we have created this, then we create we assign the virtual cloud that I created before, and which subnet I'm going to be using. Now, once I do this, I just assign it a host name, and it automatically assigns the host domain name and the URL. So that's something that we don't control, but it's just a composition of basically the virtual cloud and an ID that OCI uses, right? Now, the next part is just basically, well, we give a database name, the version, and if we're going to be using pluggable databases, the password, and what type of workload we're going to be using, if it's going to be an OTP or if it's going to be a data warehouse. Yeah, so as you can see, once we've done this, basically it gets created quite easily. It takes, depending on which storage you're using, if it's a volume manager, it gets created quite fast. If it's grid infrastructure, it does take a couple of hours to get created, and especially again as well, depending on the demand that you're having out there. So it's just be very aware of that. So once I've done this, I can easily connect to the IP that I'm giving. So it's and you can see right there that it creates my ASM or my grid infrastructure. It creates my database, and I'm using SQL CLI to connect. And once, so it is quite easy. It's very important that one of the security policies that you need to open up once you create your virtual cloud, it's the port 1521 if you're going to be connecting outside of the virtual cloud network that you created, because it won't let you or it won't allow you to connect to your database. In this case, like from my laptop to the database that I created. So it's very important that that 1521 port is open. Port 22, it is open. So it's in the past you actually had to open it but port 22 it is open. So you are able to with the wizard, with the virtual cloud wizard, you're easily connected to that. So it's so yeah, as you can see, it only takes, depending on the type of database that you're creating, it only takes a couple of hours to actually get started and start playing around with it. Again, just to recap, it's very important to create those groups, those compartments, and those policies, and set up your virtual cloud network. Once you set up that correctly, I would say that's where, at the beginning, that's where you want to spend a lot of your time, so that the rest just comes naturally cascading when you start creating your databases. So just be aware of the compartments that you're going to be creating, so that you get a clean or the cleanest cloud environment that you can. I'm sorry for some of the background noise. I do live like right next to a very busy street, and so sorry for that. So one of the cool things that when you start talking about hybrid databases is this Oracle database cloud service, right? A cloud backup service. And what the backup cloud service allows you to do is backup any databases from 10.2 and up to the current version that is out there. One of the things is as well operating systems, Linux, AIX, HPUX. So it's a very cool service to back up either your on-premise or your cloud. You can definitely do a cloud. There's different ways to do your backup, but you can use your cloud, your VM. You can use this cloud backup service to back it up to that. It does require backup encryption. It is mandatory, but there is actually no license cost regarding that backup encryption using this cloud backup service. So it's, you're not infringing on a licensing cost if you're when you're using backup encryption using this service. So one of the obvious things that we need to take into account is when using this backup service, obviously, is the size of the backup, right? Because when we're talking about using this as a hybrid, it's obviously it's going to go across the network, and that also infers in a cloud cost. So just be aware of how you're using this. So, but it's a very cool service. One of the first things that you need to do is set up what it's called a bucket in Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And what I'll do after I get done with this is I'll go into OCI so that you can actually see where we can find all of this. And I tell it what type of storage tier. So in this case, I'm using a standard, and it encrypted using the Oracle managed keys. So once I create the bucket, I go to OTN and download the latest jar file, the OCI install jar file. Now, the things that I need to find out for me to use this, one is where is my region where the bucket is. So in this case, I'm in the Toronto region. Next, I need to create the OCI API permission key. And once I create this key file, it generates a public fingerprint, and I grab this. Then I grab my user, what is it called? My user cloud ID, my tenancy ID, and my compartment ID. So those are the things that I need for me to use this cloud component. Once I have that, then I just need to tell it where the wallet is going to be installed, the library it's going to be installed, and which bucket I'm going to be using. So I'm going to be using the backup bucket that I created above. I install it. This takes no more. Once I have all of this information, it takes no more than 1 to 5 minutes to do the installation for this. And as you can see, it installed it. It creates a file called OPC, Oracle Public Cloud, and the database name that I created. So it creates 3 files. One is the library opc.so, which is going to be used within RMAN. The other one is the configuration file, which, as you can see here, it tells where the host is, where the wallet is, where the compartment that's going to be used, and the type of authentication that's going to be used. Right? And it creates our wallet that we're going to be using now. But once we do this, I go ahead now into RMAN and configure an SBT channel where I tell it the library that I'm going to be using, which is the one that was created above, and the other one is the OPC file, the configuration file that it got created above. I configure the parallelism that I want to be using, and in this case, I'm configuring the default device type to be the SBT, right? Once I do this, then I only, as I said, I need to set encryption on the password that I want to be using. And in this case, it's just an example of a backup archive log. So it's I'm creating that, and as you can see, right there, it's the Oracle Database Backup Service Library. It completes my archive log backup just very smoothly. And if I go back to the backup bucket, this is what I will see now. So I'll see a couple of, it's not as understandable as it would have been the RMAN catalog. So if I do a list backup, it doesn't show you the same. There is some metadata in there, some XML files. So it's not like a one-to-one relationship that you'll see within the bucket as the one that you took above. But it is your backup is right. Now, one of the things that you'll see out there, and this used to be in non-real time. So the metrics of how you're using your bucket, it used to take 24 hours to be reflected in the metrics. Now it only takes a couple of minutes for this information to be reflected there. So that's quite cool. As you can see, you don't see a lot of information in there because there's not much that I've been doing, especially with these buckets. But for this test and for this presentation, it's just a couple of megas, those archive logs that I backed up for this. So. So let me see. Let me see if you can. I'm going to stop the share. So I'm going to share now a Google. Sorry for that. I'm going to try to make my screen a little bit bigger. So everything that we just talked about, it's, even though it says in the free trial, it's not, but it's basically all here, right? So when we were talking about the first things, right? So it's where do you get the Oracle or the user OCID? I go to my user profile and I grab it from here. So it's this is where it's a big number. So it's not something that you can find, and so it's just copy it from here. The other one, obviously, it's the tenancy ID, and you grab it like from your profile, tenancy, and you grab it from here, right? The third part, where I go ahead and grab it, is from identity and compartments. And I go here to other users, go here to the one that I have, and this is the managed paths that I created, and I grab it from here, the OCID for the compartment that I'm using for the bucket, right? So how do you create the bucket? It's here in object storage. It's, so this is where I created this bucket. I deleted it, and this is mostly for costs things, but this is where I go ahead and create this bucket, right? So it's and just make sure that when you're creating your bucket, you set up your compartment correctly. So this is the one that I'm going to be using. You can give it the name that you want. So it's as you can see, it's quite easy to start working with your backups and your database, right? So as I was saying, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. In this section, in the database section, is where you're going to start creating your databases, your autonomous data warehouse, your autonomous transaction processing, and your BetterMail. And when we're talking about the network, right? So this is where I'm going to be creating. So I go to virtual cloud networks. I start this VCN wizard, and you can also do a VPN Connect. So in my case, I'm not using it, but as I was saying, so starting to use this, it's actually quite easy, right? So it's I can just create VCN, which compartment, the blocks, the CIDR block that I'm going to be using, the public subnet and the private subnet. So as you can see, it is quite easy to start creating the virtual cloud. It gives you a summary of how you create this virtual cloud and the gateways that you're going to be using, right? So the route tables, and you can start playing with all of this quite easily. But creating this, it's as you can see, it doesn't take me more than just a couple of, not even a minute right here, and it's already ready to use. Right? And I can see the routing tables right here. I can add my rules for here. So it's as I said, the wizard it helps you to start doing this very easy, but then you can get into very complex network setup. It all depends on what is it that you want to do, right? So it's just make sure that that you do that cleanly. Once we do that, and we can go here, and this is what I was saying. I can create my DB system. Create it there, and as I was saying, changing the shapes. This is what I can do. Now, for the information of what type of shapes or what does this stand for, because it's not like very intuitive, just click here, and I'll give you like a very small summary of what is it that it includes, right? So the VM standard 224, 24 cores with a max memory of 320 gigabytes, right? So it's different things that you can do here. The Exadata, it's what type of shape you're also going to be using, right? And again, it's not very intuitive what type of shape that you're going to be using, but I can go here and again click on configuration, and it gives you the type of shapes, right, that you're going to have. So just make sure that to choose wisely, and then just go to this small text box that Oracle has there. on the type of storage, and also oh, sorry, just a pop window. So if I go back to here, I'm just going to create that shape. Right? It's I'm going to go back to my virtual machine. One of the things that as you start playing around with the node counts as well of your DB system, take for example, right here I have a node count of 1. It allows me to do different types of Oracle software versions. But if I change the shape, if I change the shape, let's say to VM standard 2.2, which allows me to change the node count, I go to a node count of 2, the Oracle database software version, then I'm only allowed to do enterprise edition extreme performance. So as you can see, choosing wisely the type of shape that I'm going to be using, it changes the type of version that I can also use. So as you can see, if I do a node count of 2, the only one that I can use is the extreme performance one, right? Here, volume manager or Oracle Grid Infrastructure, the license that I was talking about. Here, I assign the VCN that I just created. I'm just going to put here Rene Ace. And as I can do here, it's the database version. I can do a 20C as well. It's in preview mode, so it's obviously it's the production one is recommended. It's the 19C, and just PDB, right? And here the password is just let me see if it's 9 to 30 characters, and but well, I won't get into creating it because I'm actually running out of time. But so one of the things that you can do here is enable automatic backups for this. So just make sure that obviously it infers in a cost. So just make sure that you're choosing wisely on what is it that you're going to be using. And in the advanced options, it only allows you to choose a character set. So this is something that that you want to be choosing wisely. Let me go back now to my presentation just to finish up. Okay. The last thing that I want to mention is, even though it doesn't have anything to do with OCI, just start using automation tools. I know that some of you or most of you are already using some form of it, but it is something that that I think it's mostly needed. And I do still see a lot of DBAs out there that they're not comfortable with Chef. They're not comfortable with Ansible. They're not comfortable with Docker. So it's just start getting using these automation tools so that it helps you along the way and along your path and of making this transition into a cloud, especially cloud infrastructure. Ansible for me, it's the one that I feel most comfortable with. It's in a YAML language, and the very cool thing is not like Puppet or Chef. It doesn't require a remote host. It's just uses SSH. So it's starting this. So using Ansible, it's something that you can get started very quickly. Vagrant, it's written in Ruby. It can help you create development environments and different providers and different provisioners. It's a very cool thing as well to use. And Docker, obviously, it's this container world, and they're lightweight. They don't need an extra hypervisor. So just get comfortable with some of these automation tools as you start to move. One of the things, obviously, the cloud is here to stay. So it's as I was saying, the skills, right? At the beginning of the talk was that new DBAs are becoming cloud DBAs natively. So for ourselves, or at least myself, that I've come from this on-site non-cloud world, that was one of my worries that I had, right? But if we think about it, being in IT, it's a constantly changing world, and it's just something new to learn and new to get out there. So it's a very cool thing. As I said, start getting comfortable with Docker, Ansible, start to learn how to use REST services. So it's a very cool world that starts to look there. I do want to thank you again for being here. Again, my website, rene-ace.com. Thank you very much for being here.
So thank you very much, Rene, for sharing your knowledge and experience